Good Yantiv. We can do better. Good Yantiv. Much better. There should be a card in your books. It has the words Adona Slichot. We're going to be referring to that card as we think about my remarks tonight.
Adona Slichot Bochei Levavo Gole
I remember the first time that I heard this piyut, this ancient liturgical poem. It was more than 30 years ago. Chazan Alberto Mizrahi had just come to Anshe Emet and was leading this congregation in prayer on Yom Kippur for the first time. We're about to begin Nila, the final service of Yom Kippur, marking our last opportunity to stand before God and ask for forgiveness. The urgency of that moment is captured by the name of the service, Ni'ilah, locking, a warning to every Jew that the gates of prayer are closing for this Yom Kippur. Nila is our last chance to plead with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, to hear our prayers, to earn forgiveness. I was enthralled listening to the cantor chant this introductory prayer in this awesome moment which exalts God as the one who remembers the covenant, who knows all our secrets. And then came the refrain. Chatanu lefanecha rachem aleinu. Chatanu lefanecha rachem aleinu. Is this the tune that we should use when announcing our sins and praying for mercy? In English, it would sound a little like this. We have sinned before you, have mercy on us. We have sinned before you, have mercy on us. You get what I'm saying, right? It seemed to me to be the very definition of musical incongruity. A case where the melody doesn't match up to the words. In Hebrew, we would say, lo mat'im, which simply means it doesn't fit. And Israelis would, of course, add that clicking sound, just to make sure that they emphasize the point with you. It will be tempting to explain this incongruity between the piyut and the melody as a Sephardic thing. That would not be true. Lest you think that this joyful attitude on Yom Kippur, the Day of Judgment, is an innovation from a less pious generation, hear the words of the Jerusalem Talmud taking us back almost 2,000 years. Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, and Rabbi Hoshaya once said, "Is there a nation like this nation?" Ordinarily, someone who knows he's on trial wears black and wraps himself in black and lets his beard grow since he does not know how his trial will turn out. But that's not how it is with Israel. Rather, on the day of their trial, they wear white, shave their beards, they eat, drink, rejoice, for they know that the Holy One, blessed be God, does miracles for them. Lo matim. It doesn't fit. Or as Leonard Nimoy would say in the role of Dr. Spock, highly illogical. This incongruity is not a Sephardic thing. It's not an Ashkenazic thing. It's not a Star Trek thing. It's a Jewish thing. The incompatibility of the music of Adon HaSlichot and the words, it's not an anomaly, not a Yom Kippur flight of fancy. No, the irrationality of it all represents the Jewish worldview, acting in ways that would make sense to the outside world has never been the Jewish way. Never. How else would you explain an elderly, childless couple leaving everything that they ever knew or held dear and following the promise of a God that they would yet have a child, that their descendants would become a great nation and be given a land of their own that would ultimately be a blessing to the world? How else would you explain a slave people finding the courage to break the chains of slavery, walk into the water believing that it would part before them, and then stand at Sinai, enter a covenant with the creator of heaven and earth who demanded that they keep God's Torah? How else would you explain one of the most oppressed groups of people in all of human history somehow also emerging as one of the funniest groups of people, finding humor when all would appear to be lost? Here's an example. A cantor purchased a parrot, and he quickly taught the bird how to speak. And the cantor realized one day that the parrot had learned the entire Shacharit service by listening to him pray. The cantor went to the shul. He began to boast about this extraordinary bird to the members of the congregation. No one believed him. And finally, a group of congregants got together and they made a bet with the cantor that the parrot could not lead the congregation in Musaf for Rosh Hashanah. The cantor worked with the parrot day and night to teach the bird the liturgy. Rosh Hashanah came, the shul was packed, and when it came time for Musaf, the cantor placed the parrot on the stender, wearing a little white robe. Everybody leaned forward. The bird was silent. The cantor tried to encourage the bird. Eat gadal. Nothing. After a few torturous minutes, the cantor had no other choice but to lead the congregation amidst the snickers and the shaking heads. And after the service, the humiliated cantor rushed home, the bird in tow. And once there, the cantor began to yell at the parrot, "I am so angry with you. You cost me a fortune, and you made a laughingstock out of me." The parrot responded, "Oh, stop worrying. Think of the odds we'll get on Yom Kippur." Tell me this. What are the odds for a people in exile for a generation living in what is now Iran, choosing to go back to a devastated Israel to rebuild a temple and resurrect a land lying in ruins? Has there ever been another people who responded to a prophecy like that of the prophet Ezekiel, who was looking over the destruction of the land of Israel and heard God's voice calling out, "Ben Adam, hatichiena, ha'atzamot ha'ela?" "O son of man, can these dry bones yet live?" And our people said, "Yes." When Hellenism swept across much of the world with its revolutionary approach to all aspects of culture, philosophy, art, government, would you have taken the bet that the Jews would decide to reject this powerful worldview and choose Jerusalem over Athens? Under the leadership of the Maccabees, that's exactly what they did. How does it make sense that when the temple was destroyed and the Jews were in exile across the world, the Jews rejected Islam and Christianity and suffered horrible discrimination and unspeakable persecution? And through it all, Jews clung to their God and to their tradition when the rational choice would have been to accept an alternative to monotheism. And with everything that the Jews endured in Europe and around the world, who would have blamed them if when they came to this country, they would have fully assimilated into the great melting pot of America? While some did go that route, the vast majority of Jews chose to build a remarkable Jewish community with magnificent synagogues and an array of social services. Today, even with a 70% intermarriage rate among the non-Orthodox, a significant number of these families are creating Jewish homes and bringing their children up as Jews, choosing not to heed the dire predictions of demographers or the tired storyline of Hollywood scriptwriters of a failing Jewish community. After the Shoah, Jews could have easily justified rejecting everything they had to do with Judaism and walk away, rejecting a God who would allow its covenantal partner to suffer such horrors. The same could be said regarding Jews throughout the Arab world, who were brutally banished from countries that had been their home for hundreds of years, living side by side with their Muslim neighbors. The rational choice would have been to seek shelter in some other land. But instead they made the Jewish choice, and they returned to the land of our people, joining those Jews who were already there, took up arms, and fought to build a Jewish state after nearly 2,000 years in exile. Chatanu lefanecha rachem aleinu. Chatanu lefanecha rachem aleinu. I believe that when Jewish historians look back at the period that we are currently living, they will hold it up as one of the great examples of this peculiar worldview. A people who consistently refused to accept the story the world had written for it and chose their own path, no matter how irrational, incongruous, or improbable it seemed to the rest of the world, no matter the odds against us. How much has changed in a year? I remember standing on this pulpit on the high holidays last high holidays, and speaking about the judicial reform which had torn Israel apart to the extent that soldiers across the Israeli military were refusing to serve. I also addressed extremist elements that were now serving in ministerial positions in the Netanyahu government and shared my deep concern that Israel was on the brink of civil war. While my thinking aligned with Zionist thought leaders like Yossi Klein Halevi and Rabbi Daniel Gordis, it was the most critical sermon I'd ever given about Israel, a reflection of a dangerous moment in the history of the modern state. In Iran, in Gaza, and Lebanon, the enemies of Israel were also watching the mass rallies, observing the tension between Washington and Jerusalem and the fraught nature of the relationship between American and Israeli Jews. From this, they concluded the time was right to strike out at Israel, and so on October 7th, it happened. In their diabolical master plan, Israelis would see the horror of the bloodshed, the inhuman brutality of the enemy, and younger Jews would leave the country rather than serve in the army and follow their dot-com dreams somewhere else. While Israel's enemies believed in Israeli technological superiority, they doubted that Israelis had the will, the grit to go into the hell of Gaza, into their tunnels, and fight. They believed that American Jewry would be too divided to stand behind Israel, especially in the face of a well-financed and highly organized anti-Israel propaganda campaign in America and Europe, which began immediately on October 7th. And finally, they believed that Israel's response would be blunted by the United States along with European allies, and that its leadership would heed their call, giving Hamas the chance to announce the victory and a premature end to the war. Everything that Khomeini, Sinwar, and Nasrallah believed would happen was perfectly logical. They were gleefully writing the beginning of Israel's last chapter. How wrong they were. How wrong our enemies were about younger Israelis. Just how quickly they came to join their units or squadrons, and how those living around the world came back to Israel so that they could serve. What our enemies did not count on was that Jews had their own system of logic. They could not have predicted how many thousands of everyday Israelis would act with unstinting courage to save others that day. They could have never dreamed of how Israeli citizens jumped into action where their government proved to be ineffectual, working instantly and creatively to give their sons and daughters in the IDF what they needed, from Kevlar vests to Shabbos meals. Israelis redefined the rabbinic dictum, Kol Yisrael Arivim Ze Bazeh. All Israel is responsible for one another. And as we discussed on Rosh Hashanah, world Jewry acted in ways that might have defied conventional logic as well. With all their ruses, their elaborate preparations, years of diverting humanitarian aid to their own people in order to build hundreds of miles of tunnels in Gaza, with Iran's massive arming of its ring of fire to the detriment of their own economy, what our enemies were most unprepared for was Israel's will to fight its enemies and not be deterred from its mission. While they may have convinced themselves and much of the world that Israel is a colonialist state, Jews have long understood in their hearts and souls that Israel has always been our people's home, that there has always been a Jewish presence there, and the lesson that Jewish history taught us during the 20th century, as Golda Meir said more than a half century ago, we Jews have a secret weapon in our struggle with the Arabs. We have no place to go. Golda's words were captured in a song written by Ehud Manor in honor of his brother who fell defending the state of Israel. Ein li eretz acheret. I have no other country. Gam im admati bo'eret. Even if my land is burning. Rak milah bivrit choderet. Just a word in Hebrew penetrates to my veins, to my soul. Beguf koev, belev ra'ev. With a weak body, with a hungry heart. Kan hu beiti. Here is my home. There's a reason that you see bumper stickers across Israel with the words, Ein li eretz acheret. I have no other country. In their zeal to destroy the one and only Jewish state, our enemies blinded themselves to the fact that the Jews of Israel firmly and fully believe that they have nowhere else to go, that they are home. And judging from Jewish history, it would be irrational to think otherwise. After the smoke of this war has cleared, and the hostages, God willing, come home, perhaps the Palestinians, the Muslim nations, and the entire world will open their eyes and accept the historical legitimacy and the reality of the one and only Jewish state after nearly 80 years and a historical presence that goes back thousands. Perhaps leaders in this country will stop calling for a two-state solution without giving due consideration of what will be asked of the Palestinians to ensure its success. Perhaps the Palestinian Authority will stop publishing textbooks with no map of Israel, only Palestine, and stop teaching their children to shout from the river to the sea. Perhaps Israel's prime minister will stand up to the extremists that he has brought into his government, respond to their provocative statements, and take meaningful action against the wanton acts of violence against Palestinians in the territories that they condone and encourage. While I'm not confident that any of this will happen anytime soon, what I do know is that these are the prerequisites of a better way forward for a Palestinian people that are not going anywhere, and Jews who believe with every fiber of their being, Kan hu beiti, here is my home. Ein li eretz acheret, I have no other country. When the Palestinians and the Arab world come to accept this fact, I know that most Israelis will be ready to join in a new future. Until then, our future is uncertain. We as a people have been here before on many a Kol Nidre night in our long history, and yet, Am Yisrael Chai. The people of Israel yet lives. So let us take our future in our hands and write our next chapter. Standing together with our brothers and sisters in Israel, together as an Am Echad, one people, Im Lev Echad, with one heart, Biyachad, together. And as the gates thankfully close on this past year, let us determine to forge a new, brighter, and better path forward. Not because logic dictates that it be so, not because the odds are on our side, but because with the help of God, we will it to be. I invite you to join me in an ancient liturgical poem with an incongruous but very Jewish melody as we pray for forgiveness and a better and more peaceful day that we know lies ahead. Please join the cantor.